Once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out to the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just mass and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the Graphic Novel Apostle.
Hello and welcome to the Graphic Novel Apostle. I want to welcome you all back and thank you for being here with us. Very excited today to jump into our discussion of I Killed Giants with my friend Crystal Hogg, who's sitting here with me.
Hello.
Hey, Crystal.
Hey, how are you?
I am wonderful. I'm glad you're here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I am really excited for getting into this book, but there are just a couple of housekeeping things I want to take care of before we start our discussion. First, I want to let all of you out there who are listening know that the next time we come back in 2 weeks for another full episode, we're going to talk to my friend Travell McManus, our producer from the first 3 episodes of the podcast, and the consultant, I'll call him, who really got us going at the very start of this. This is going to be my first time on one of these 2-person episodes to try and handle the production duties as well. So don't blame Travell if this doesn't sound just awesome, but it will, trust me. But anyway, next time we will have Travell on the podcast. We're going to discuss Radiant Black, Volume 1, which is called Not So Secret Origin. It's written by Kyle Higgins with art by Marcello Costa, and then there are a host of other guest creators that were involved as well, either in the writing or art or production. We'll go through the credits more so then. The other thing I want to remind you about as we get started is that, as always, there will be plenty of spoilers in this podcast. We're going to talk about all parts of the story. We maybe aren't going to talk in the same level of detail about every panel or every page of the story as we have in previous episodes. At least that's my plan. You guys can be the judge at the end whether I accomplish that or not. But we will talk about all of the major plot points and turns. So just please be prepared for that. So today's book is I Killed Giants, written by Joe Kelly, with art by Ken Niimura. It was published by Image Comics originally in 7 single comic book issues that were released beginning back in 2008. And Crystal, I don't know if you were aware of this or not, but this was also made into a full Hollywood motion picture with Zoe Saldana.
I did see that.
Yeah. Did you see the movie?
No, I did. I read about it a little bit. I looked up a little bit of information about the history and the author and the artist before. After I read the novel, and I was surprised to see that. I'd like to see it. Yeah,
I will tell you, it is worth your time. I don't have a perfect recollection of that movie by any means. It's probably been a year since I've seen it, but I read it, or excuse me, I watched it probably the first time after I'd read, after my first reading of the book, and I was impressed by how true to the story the movie hewed. Sometimes you can get pretty far afield, and that's fine. You have all different kinds of adaptations, but personally, I like a really straight adaptation of source material. And this, right down to the characters looking like they look in the book. In fact, I had forgotten that this was a black and white comic because in my mind, I think the visuals have become the color images from the movie, which was really kind of neat. So I would encourage people to go check that out. Well, let's talk a little bit about just the synopsis of the book itself. And I'll tell you, Crystal, the reason why I wanted to cover this one really early in the podcast is because I think it's an important graphic novel. The others that we've done up to this point are books that I chose because I love them and because I thought they paired well with one of my particular friends. But this book, I think is great, but I don't have the same sort of love for, but I still find it really meaningful. And it's one of those books that when you look up like lists of, graphic novels everybody must read or whatever, this often turns up on those lists, and it is certainly a moving story. Let me read just the 1-paragraph synopsis of it, and then we can talk a little bit more about why I wanted you specifically to be the person to cover this with me. So, I Killed Giants, this is from the back of the book, tells the story of Barbara Thorson, an acerbic middle schooler who is convinced that a giant is coming to town. A giant she's sworn to find, hunt, and kill. As the monster draws closer and dark omens abound, the lines between Barbara's fantasy life and real-world problems become blurred, ultimately revealing a powerful and emotional truth. I think that pretty well gets to the heart of the book.
Yeah, I think so.
So, Crystal, there won't be any secret for anyone who knows us both in real life. You are a social worker.
Yes.
And you have dedicated your whole career to working with children who have experienced trauma in their lives. Would you talk a little bit about sort of how you found your way into this career and how it has evolved over the years?
Yeah, sure. I think it definitely wasn't something that I went to college and was like, I want to do social work. I honestly didn't know anybody who is a social worker. I grew up in a really small rural town in South Arkansas and kind of went to college clueless about what I wanted to do and kind of stumbled my way into social work. I took some psychology classes and loved them and thought I wanted to do therapy and had a minor in sociology, and through that minor took some social work classes, and everything just kind of fit together. I loved psychology and found it very interesting, but I loved how social work takes the problems and looks at more than just the problem, and looks at a whole system, and also brings strengths into the situation and the assessment, and doesn't just kind of psychoanalyze things and look at problems and dissect traumas and issues, but really pulls together a strengths perspective and a holistic view of the world. And I found it just made sense for me. And then when I started doing work, initially, I thought I wanted my focus to be adults with serious and persistent mental illness, and worked in the community's mental health system. And I found that very interesting. But a lot of that work, the stability depends on how compliant the adults are with their medication. And I found that to be something I had very little control over. Not that I have control over anything, to be honest. But I felt like that was something that I had less ability to have an impact on. And then during graduate school, I worked at Youth Home, which is a residential psychiatric program for adolescents who have had some sort of behavioral health issue that's been long-standing, and they need something more that's 3 to 5 months long. And just fell in love with the kids, love the work. And I've done other things in social work. I've done adoption work. I've worked with the unhoused population, but just always kind of seemed to find my way back to kids and teenagers. They're my passion.
Well, that's awesome. And you are very much a natural helper. I mean, a natural mom too. You're one of my friends that I look to when I see, like, okay, this is a person who's not going to let anybody fall. Who's going to be there to catch folks. I mean, that's awesome.
I'm going to try.
Well, that's who you are, and that's really wonderful. I guess I haven't really talked about this on the podcast, but maybe about 2 years ago, a group of about 6 or 7 families that we know started working with a couple of brothers in their 20s who were Afghan refugees. And a lot of the families that were involved in this group, and yours was and mine as well, we'd known each other for a lot of years, some of us, but I don't know, maybe there were different things. We hadn't worked in that type of way before, that type of collaborative way.
Right.
And it was really funny to see the different personalities come through, like in our group texts and things, where a couple of us, I think, just felt like, oh, they have this need. Let's go run and take care of this need and just do it for them right away.
Right.
And while you always wanted to see needs met, I think you also had a healthy dose of reality to say maybe we're enabling a problem here, or maybe we're not helping by helping in this situation. And frankly, we needed somebody to give us a little of that street smart too.
It's hard. It's hard. And honestly, I think a lot of that comes from just having teenagers in the house. I mean, I think that you will find that line gets so blurry so fast about helping someone find independence in a healthy way. And it's not a perfect journey for anyone, but definitely it can be tricky, but it's also rewarding.
Tell me this, in the life of a professional social worker, and I often have thought of a social worker's job as like maybe even reading a file to understand what a person's issues and needs are, and then helping to connect them with social services or whatever types of therapies they need. And I guess I haven't always thought of that as being quite as hands-on.
Yeah.
But I think it probably is more so than I envisioned it. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that a little?
Sure. Social work's like other professions in that people have different specialties and there's different levels of licensure. And I think a lot of times when people think of social work, they think more of that bachelor level social work, kind of in the field, hands-on, navigating the bureaucracy behind systems and doing home visits. And it's very, very difficult work. But it's rewarding and it makes huge changes because it is very hands-on and living in the trenches with the families. That's very important work. Mine, I actually did not get my bachelor's in social work. I got it in psychology. So I kind of went into this field with the goal of being a mental health professional. And a master's level social worker can become licensed to be a therapist. And so that is my background as I came into social work as a psychology major and then focused on becoming a licensed certified social worker in order to be able to do therapy. And so I think that you still, as a social worker, because you are so interested in systems and how all the pieces fit together, and you realize you can't help someone work through their depression if they're hungry and unhoused. So you still have those systems that you've got to navigate, but it all is a puzzle that you're working on in pieces. And the level that I want to work on, I think, as a whole, builds to not only their physical needs being met, but then working to a place to where they become their healthiest emotionally as well. So the social workers I work with, I work in a children's hospital, and some have a very medical focus where they're focusing on helping kids adjust to their illness and helping the families get the medical needs they need in their community. But then some of us also really focus on working through the emotional and behavioral issues that impact kids and help them become a healthier, whole person that encompasses their behavioral health needs too.
In the life of your work with an individual child or family, how long does your period of contact usually extend with either that child or with their wider family?
Yeah, it just depends on the job. My most recent hands-on work with families was as a resource coordinator through the hospital, and so I would follow up with families when they left and do a bigger assessment about what sort of behavioral health needs brought that family to the hospital. And that interaction with that family could be one short phone call where we were, talk through what their resource needs are. I'm able to help them connect with what they need. Or it could go on years where if the child had a really complicated health history or trauma history, and sometimes those histories involve things like chronic illness or developmental disabilities and adoption and attachment issues and moves and loss of insurances and all those things, it could take years to navigate. So I think it just depends on the goal and what the overall issues are. Most social work jobs aren't that open to having a time span. For instance, a job I had where I worked in the residential behavioral health program, that was a 3 to 5 month stint with those families, and you didn't have contact with them once they left. But I think it just depends. Most people have a short-term relationship with social workers. It's kind of frowned upon. It's actually not even ethical to be considered to have that kind of a lifelong, ongoing relationship with somebody that you've provided social work for. So I think that seems counterintuitive when you think of yourself as a young person going into a helping field. You think you'll want to know forever and follow forever, but I think it's really important to make sure that those boundaries are clear about what the purpose of your role in their life, setting clear expectations kind of from the beginning with that family about what your role is and what to expect as far as like you said, kind of the length of that relationship and what it'll look like when that relationship's coming to an end and how you'll help them transition into the next step. So it should always be a temporary piece of their life.
Do you think most families appreciate that? And I mean, understand that is the sense of the word. I mean, appreciate that they understand that you're not going to be involved with them forever. Yeah,
I think the only social work job I've had where I felt like it can kind of span almost kind of like a forever is when I did adoption work. I worked with those families from the time they first contacted someone with an interest in adoption and educated them on adoption and then helped them prepare and do their home studies. Then supported them in post-placement, and then worked with agencies to help provide support afterwards, sometimes if things weren't going well. Those relationships often were a little grayer about if I'm continuing to work for that. As long as I worked for that agency, I'd be a support they could have. So I don't think that it was really easy for either one of us always to understand or appreciate what the definition of that relationship looked like. Honestly, for most situations that I've worked in social work, people were ready for the relationship to come and go because me being there represented a crisis in their life. And so they were hoping that I was coming there to help them get to a better place where they could move on and not have to be involved in that situation, that issue, that problem anymore.
Do the children have a harder time accepting that you're not going to continue to be involved in their lives? Because I have to imagine that a lot of times those kids see you as somebody who is safe and steady.
Yeah. I do think my role, not only in working as a mental health tech before I was a master's level social worker in that residential behavioral health setting, but also when I worked as a therapist, I worked in a psychiatric hospital. It was really hard for kids to come and go and know that they weren't going to be able to continue to talk to me when they left, for some kids. And it just was education from the beginning and making sure my boundaries were very clear, that I am here to be someone to help you get better, and I represent a certain piece and time in your life and will be a support and give it my all while I'm here, and then I'm going to do the best I can to help you transition in a healthy way. And as long as I think I did a pretty good job of explaining on the end in the beginning what my role was, then it was okay. But there were times I didn't do a great job of keeping those boundaries clear, and it was hard, I think, for the kids then to transition and understand, despite the fact that I had tried to explain it. I think my actions had said something else, and it meant to them, it was hard for them to understand that even though I had been saying our relationship will kind of transition to where you'll have support on the outside that won't be me, I had always been somebody who was there for them those 3 to 5 months. And so it was really hard for them to navigate that transition. And I think it just depends on the kid. But yeah, for sure, it was definitely hard at times.
How do you personally find a way to separate what you do from Crystal, who goes home at night to her kids and husband?
For me, when I became a mom, I decided I needed to work with a different population than kids. I did find it was really hard to work with kids who were hurting and struggling and dealing with trauma all day and then come home to a newborn. And so that was when I transitioned to working with an adult population, and that was healthier for me. I went to working with kids and families once my kids were a little older and they were in school, and it just felt like I was kind of in a different place where I didn't have infants and toddlers. I didn't have the same level of emotional demand. So for me, those years that are so intense with infants and toddlers, I couldn't work with kids. It was just too much for me at that time. But honestly, kids keep me so busy that by the time I get off of work, I fully am prepared to switch and transition into something else. So I've been doing this almost 25 years, so I probably it just took practice. But I find it pretty easy to switch off and become mom once I get in the car and drive out of the parking lot.
Well, that's awesome. You know, I started a comic book podcast, and I think we think of escapism when we think of things like a comic book. And I asked you, I really wanted to talk to you about this book, and I asked you to do it. And after you agreed and had, I think, even read some of it, I remember I texted you one night saying, like, I'm sorry, you deal with these types of heavy emotional situations all day long, and now I'm asking you to do it in your free time too. But you were pretty open about it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I found it very reading a book and knowing that in the beginning, if it looks like it's going to be upsetting or stressful at times, I can push through knowing that this book is going to end. I know it's a point in time, and I'm going to be able to get through this book and hopefully gain something from reading it that is going to make me a better social worker, a better mom, a better person in general, a better support to others. And I do feel like I could tell very early on that this book was going to be something that was going to be something that, regardless of how it ends, it's going to have something that touches my practice as a social worker. And I think that it did accomplish that.
Oh, that's wonderful. There's a character in this movie, Ms. Molly, and of course that's the character, I say in this movie, in this book, that's the character that Zoe Saldana played in the movie as well. I'm going to be really interested to hear your thoughts as we get to the different points where she's interacting with Barbara Thorsten about how she's handling the situation, whether these experiences ring true. I don't know how much consultation Joe Kelly might have done when he was writing this with professional counselors to gain their experience. I have to imagine that he did some research and had some consultants, but I guess I just don't know, and I'm really looking forward to your perspective there.
Yeah.
I want to talk first, though, about your experience of reading this book, and we'll talk about comics in general in a minute, but you told me something this morning that I was kind of blown away by.
I almost didn't tell you that.
Well, so when I first asked you to do this, I mentioned that this book is available on Hoopla, and it could be downloaded from the library. And I read a lot of books that way on my iPad. And I also had a physical copy of this book. And you texted me yesterday and asked if I could bring you my physical copy. So you told me you wanted to look through the physical book as well because you had read this entire book on your phone.
I did, yeah.
I would rather put my head through the wall than have to read an entire graphic novel on an iPhone. Wow. Tell me about that experience.
Okay. So I almost ordered the book. And then I was like, well, I'm just going to see what it looks like when I download this. And I couldn't sleep one night. I was laying in bed and I was like, this is a great time for me to read this book and open it up and be able to just kind of spend some time because I was wide awake. So I downloaded it, and I have gotten to where my eyes are not great. And so it was really actually good for me to be able to, I could zoom in on the art. I could really look up close at the art. I would have to kind of navigate the screen a little bit to read the whole thing, but I got through it really fast. It really wasn't a problem for me. And when I saw an image that I really wasn't sure what it was, I loved that I could zoom in and out and look at it. So I felt like it worked fine for me, but I thought this is not doing this graphic novel justice to read it by phone. I need to see it in print.
Fair enough. Now, there are a couple of different ways that these books can sometimes be displayed in a digital format, either a page-by-page view or a panel-by-panel view. Were you aware of which way you were reading it?
No, that's good to know. I wish I would have done the panel by panel. I did it by page, but then zoomed in on each image as I was looking at it.
Oh my goodness, that is the trials of Job to get through.
No, it wasn't bad.
Well, thank you for your dedication.
No,
there are comics that are made specifically for the purpose of being read on phones and look pretty good on tablets too. That are vertical scrolling comics. Marvel does a lot of these and publishes them as what are called their Infinity comics. And I'm less familiar with webtoon type comics, but I understand that a lot of them are done that way as well. And so it's really meant to be in that type of experience. Much harder, I would think, for a traditional format.
I enjoyed it. I laid there and read the whole thing.
Well, I'm glad. So let me ask you then about the art. This comic is in black and white. And I will tell you, just for me and my own preferences, I know there are comic readers who say they see black and white and they say, I'm out. Don't even show it to me. I don't care. And there are others who think having color is terrible. Maybe they don't think it's terrible, but they think it's purer when they see a black and white comic. I'm somewhere in the middle. I strongly prefer color in the comics. And I'm picky about what I like and don't like in black and white. There are some books. There's an artist named Chris Somney who does a lot of black and white, and his work is phenomenal. And I think so much of it is that he's good about not overcomplicating images. He leaves a lot of white space and a lot of just black space in his panels and in his illustrations. And I think a lot of the time where I think black and white comics can become kind of a mess is where you try to show too much action, or you make the panels too busy. And I do think, I hate being critical of any comic creator, because I know they're doing something that really speaks to them and really speaks to a lot of people. But for my tastes, the art in this book I felt like was a little too busy to be presented in a black and white format. There were a lot of times, too, some of the images, and we're going to talk about the giants and those kinds of things, some of those things are meant to be not clearly defined figures,
It definitely has an abstract feel.
Yeah, and sometimes that was to the point where I was like, I can't really follow the action here.
Yeah. I do think in the first, probably, I don't know, maybe the first 10 or 11 pages, I was struggling a little bit. And I knew some of it was because I was looking on the phone. But I was having a hard time following what I was seeing and matching it with the words. But pretty quickly, I think I got into the groove of being able to kind of follow the illustrator's work along with the words, and it just started to make sense. But there were some images where I'm like, I'm not entirely sure what I'm seeing right now. For instance, one of the very first images, she's stitching. She's stitching the picture of her hammer on her handbag, and I was like, I'm not real sure what I'm looking at, and it took me a little bit. I had to kind of go read forward and then come back and read forward and come back, and I was like, oh, she's sewing. She's creating an image by sewing, and so it took me a little bit to kind of get in the groove, but once I did, I didn't have any trouble. It was just probably the first 10 pages or so.
Yeah, and I can see how a creator could find a way to do that intentionally, where they don't want you to catch right away. And I suppose I don't know what the intention here is, whether it was to be a little more confounding and then sort of open up to where we see better or not. But it takes some warming up to, at the very least.
Well, I will say, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, I think there were times where it goes along with where she is emotionally.
Oh, talk about that a little.
So she's struggling. She's got a lot of trauma. She's going through some emotional stuff. And there are times where she's clearer and times where she's a lot more chaotic in what's going on in her head and her actions and her behaviors. And I do feel like the images that I had struggled more with trying to figure out what was going on was more along the timeline of where she doesn't seem to understand where she was emotionally either.
That makes a lot of sense, sure. Well, that's phenomenal. So before we talk much more about the story presented here, tell me about your history, if any, with comics or graphic novels.
Yeah. I'm kind of embarrassed to say, because I know this, probably a lot of your listeners are big comic book readers. In general, I'm embarrassed to say this too, I don't read a ton. I've gone through phases of my life where I read more than others. This has kind of been a spell where I've not read very much. My experience with comic books is pretty limited. As a kid, I loved the Sunday comics, read them religiously. That was probably about the extent of my exposure until probably 5 years ago. I heard an interview by an artist who did a graphic novel about his life, his childhood, and he had grown up with his grandparents and felt like an outsider, and as he grew up realized his life really wasn't that unusual. There's a lot of kids going through that, and he wanted to make sure he communicated that to the other kids living a similar childhood, what he experienced. And I have a kid in my life who was going through that very same thing, and just felt like it was meant to be that I turned on the radio while I heard this artist speak, and bought the book, and me and my kiddo both devoured it, and it kind of holds a special place in our heart because it took a really complicated emotional time in our lives, and puts having it in the novel, a graphic novel format, brings a little bit of levity to it. Breaking it up into pictures makes it something that's a little easier to take bites out of, and I felt like it was great for both of us to just have a little bit of validation that we're not the only people in the world who sometimes have complicated, messy situations. And the bigger message I wanted my kiddo to hear was, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Like, your family may look different than other people's families, but that's okay. Truthfully, everybody's family is a little different, and you're going to be all right. You've got tons of support, tons of love, and you're going to be all right. And I feel like this artist did a great job of creating that. The name of the book I'm referring to is Hey Kiddo. And I'm going to butcher the guy's last name. It's Jarrett. Can you say his last name?
I can give it a go.
It's a beautiful last name.
I was not familiar with this writer or artist before. Jarrett J. Krakoska?
I think so.
And I didn't know if you wanted to share what that book was or not.
Yeah. It's a great book. I would recommend it. For my reader was about 11 when we read it. I would say just read it, give it a read before you give it to your kid. Make sure you're okay with it, because they talk about their life in a really frank way, which is healthy, honestly. But just make sure your kids developmentally where they're ready to talk through things in that format. There's a little bit of cursing in there because it's kind of some real life stuff. But I found it beautiful and very helpful, and I have recommended it to a lot of families since I've read it. So this book reminds me a lot of that. And I know we're going to go through it in a little more detail to explain why I say that later. But I definitely feel like I Kill Giants is something now I have in my tool belt to recommend to families.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, let's move now into discussing the story itself. And there are some really heavy themes that are presented in this book, and some really upsetting themes. Do you want to kind of address that just a little bit? I mean, you mentioned with Hey Kiddo that you would recommend a parent read that first before they give it to a child or a child's friend, I guess, to figure out if it was age appropriate. And what about I Kill Giants?
I think it's the same. I have the same just advice here, that if a caregiver or a loved one is going to give this to a kid, I would give it a read first and pay attention to it pretty closely, because there are some pretty heavy themes in there. I wasn't entirely sure in the first couple of chapters what heaviness this book was referring to, and so your imagination can go a little wild about all the different things she's dealing with, because she does have some pretty significant emotional struggles. There's a piece in the novel that references, it's very short, honestly, missed it initially, but that references cutting. And so I think that there are a couple of really heavy pieces. I would just make sure that if you're going to recommend this to somebody, that they're in an emotionally in a safe enough place to be able to kind of handle some of those themes, or at least in a place where they feel comfortable stopping and talking to somebody if they get upset by what they see.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. I really appreciate that. And while we'll be dealing with a lot of heavy themes, ultimately, this book is, I believe, trying to present a ray of hope.
Yeah.
And there's an inscription at the very beginning of the book, right before the story itself begins. And it sort of references something that we'll come back to toward the end of the book. But it just reads, "To those fighting their own giants, you're stronger than you think." And I guess that's the message of the book when it comes down to it. All right, well, let's get into it a little bit. We start out in chapter 1, which is called The Hammer, and we are introduced to Barbara Thorson. Barbara Thorson is in the 5th grade. We learned that pretty quick, so I guess this makes her about 11 years old. And when we first meet her, she is engaged in a very full fantasy life. And we'll find out pretty quickly that most of her life revolves around this fantasy life, and maybe a problem that she has, and it's a defense, but maybe also a problem, is that the lines are really blurred for her between what is fantasy and what is real.
Right.
And so we first see her, and she's got this pocketbook, and she's stitching it with a needle and thread, and she's stitching something that we come to figure out pretty quickly is the image of this hammer. And she's almost, it's not like a magical incantation or anything, but it's almost like she's play acting, say, a fantasy drama of some kind, where she's talking about the strength of this hammer that she's going to be putting inside the pocketbook. She says, "Take the force of my enemy and send it back to him 1,000 times." So very dramatic, and she's very serious about this.
Yeah.
We go from that little introduction to seeing her in her regular day at school. And so it is career day, and we've got different parents coming in, and they're going to tell the kids about what they do for a living. And this one guy is a motivational speaker, and he's getting all the kids chanting about, like, woohoo, 5th grade, and he's showing them how they get all fired up. And the teacher notices that Barbara is not paying any attention and calls her out about it. I go through this not to hit every single detail here, but really just to say this is kind of emblematic of how Barbara interacts with the world outside of her mind.
Right.
And that is, she is put off by the fact that the teacher would interrupt her from the important work that she believes she's doing, studying giants. She says, none of this that you guys are doing on career day is relevant to me because I've got a job. And, they ask, okay, so what job is that? And there's this beautiful double-page spread where she stands up and is going to announce to the class what her specialty is. And she says, I find giants, I hunt giants, I kill giants. And there is not a drop of insincerity in her voice.
No.
And I don't think she cares at all. I think she, one, knows that people look at her as kind of a weirdo outcast, and two, I don't think she cares. I mean, you see how she's dressed too. She wears these like tall bunny ears pretty well at all times, almost as a way of like sort of intentionally setting herself apart.
Right.
And of course, this type of response brings her into conflict with the teacher. She gets sent to the principal's office, and we see how she interacts with the principal, that these two are well acquainted with one another. In fact, I mean, she's so sarcastic to him after he gives her detention for a week or whatever the punishment is. She says, pleasure doing business with you. And they know they're going to do this dance again pretty soon.
Right.
But as she moves on from there, she goes home, and while maybe she was projecting some strength while she's out there in the world, she goes back to her house, and we see from the images that she lives like right on the seashore. We'll learn later in the book that they're in Long Island, New York, which is just across the Long Island Sound from where I grew up in southern Connecticut. But she is there. Her house is on the shore. She's walking home, and I mean, even her posture has changed by the time she gets back to her house, and she's just sort of dragging her book bag in. Once she comes in the door, she takes a glance up the stairs, and everything is sort of shadowed, and you can tell.
Super scary.
I mean, even her bunny ears that she wears
They've
that aren't
wilted.
Right, they wilted. They're hanging down. It's sort of like you see a dog's tail drop after it's not happy anymore.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, talk to me about what you're seeing here.
When I saw her response to coming home and how fearful she was of being there in general and then alone, I was concerned for her safety. I was worried about what is hiding at the top of that stairs, or what is waiting at the top of that stairs for her that she's so scared of. And I was worried that home was not a safe place for her, that maybe someone in the home hurt her. She definitely has her guard around people to kind of put off this really tough exterior to keep herself safe. And it just kind of fit this picture for me that there's some trauma here that she's protecting herself from, but home is she's just not, she doesn't have what it takes to maintain that tough exterior at home. There's still something there that's really fearful. It makes her really fearful.
I think about that meme that you see on Facebook or wherever else once in a while, where it'll show an iceberg and just the little tip of it is sticking up out of the water, and there'll be an arrow that says like, what you see of what's going on in a person's life, and what's going on is everything that's underneath. And I remember in elementary school those kids that were always kind of on the margins, and not just because they were socially uncomfortable and into different types of things, but those kids that acted out a lot. And at the time, you have a black and white view of a lot of things in the world as a kid, and I remember thinking those are just bad kids. I mean, their behavior was not appropriate, but at the same time, good Lord, who knows, what's going on in people's lives. And I don't know, that's something I try really hard to think consciously about that on a regular basis, because every day we're going to run into somebody who doesn't treat us the way we expect. Right.
Well, and I think, you have to have, I think as a kid you would read this and think that the school, the teacher and the principal, they're just jerks. But my goodness, I'm sure they're like, here we go again. And just kind of looking at the behavior, it's very difficult for them, I guess, to probably dive into what's going on. 'Cause she's certainly not going to let them. She's not going to invite them in. All they've got to deal with is the behavior that's right in front of them, and it can be pretty difficult, you can tell.
Well, and when we get to meet Ms. Molly here coming up in just a little bit, I mean, she fights hard to get into Barbara's life, to the point where Barbara assaults her a couple of times.
Yeah.
I guess it takes that kind of person. And, the principal and the teacher their jobs are different.
Right.
They need to be aware of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they're maybe not as well equipped, certainly, as Ms. Molly is. Well, let's jump back to where we were, though, in the story. So Barbara comes home, and the next person we see coming in the door is a woman who, to my eyes, at first glance, I'm assuming this is Mom.
Right.
Coming in. I mean, she's young, but, I don't know. Hard to tell her age exactly, I guess. And she's got, a professional-looking outfit on, a scarf around her neck. She's got bags of groceries that she's hauling in. And she goes in, she starts making dinner, and she's very, harried, and the scene in the house is chaotic as well. But we learn this isn't her mom. This is her older sister.
Right.
Who ultimately we'll end up finding out is just about 18 years old.
Yeah.
She's not, she's still a kid.
Right.
In her own way as well. I guess she's out of school because she talks about her job, and she's putting on her best brave face as an adult.
Right.
Wants to make herself sound important in her position at
Yeah.
work to the family.
Right.
And of course, not only is the family not appreciative of what she's doing, working and cooking dinner and all this kind of thing, but the Barbara and her brother are, they're giving her grief.
They're tough, yeah. They're a tough crowd.
Oh my goodness gracious, they're a tough crowd. And they also don't care anything to hear about what is going on in Barbara's life. They want to play their Dungeons and Dragons type tabletop game, which for Barbara is really more just an extension of her fantasy world that she wants to live in. But we see, over the course of a couple of pages, Barbara brings a lot of problem on herself. I don't know whether there's blame to be had there or whether it's just part of her dealing with what's going on in her life. But, even here, she ends up ruining the meal, kind of ruining the environment or the atmosphere at dinner through her acting out.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's probably not uncommon with, this whole family is in crisis. But at this point, we still don't really know what that's all about. Something, though, that I think is kind of sweet as we wrap up this scene is that Barbara knows that her behavior has kind of ruined the evening for pretty well everybody. And she goes outside her house and sits down on the steps and just kind of sulks.
Yeah.
And her sister, and she's just talking to herself, and I think she realizes what's going on, that that her sister is really trying her best, and she's just not equipped to basically
raise kids.
Right. From what we can see, she is playing the role of parent here.
Right.
And the sister comes out to try and comfort her too, and that's kind of sweet.
You can tell the big sister is a safe punching bag. They're all angry. They're all hurt. Something's going on. And sisters, I'm not saying that she necessarily handles everything right. You can tell she can be kind of a jerk too, but she's doing the best she can, and she's a safe punching bag for the other siblings.
Yeah. We have this last little scene here at the end of the first chapter of the book where this is something that kind of recurs throughout the story. As part of Barbara's fantasy world, she sees these little fairy-type creatures.
Little pixies.
Yeah, little pixies that are floating around her all the time, and some of them are funny, and some of them are mischievous, and some of them, are warning her about trouble. And she can talk to them.
Yeah.
And, she's reminding them of how important a job she has in front of her. So
right.
I got to kill these giants. And so, it's interesting, too. We hadn't really talked about this, but Barbara feels a genuine responsibility.
Yeah.
There is a world to be saved, and it's up to her to save it.
I will say this age is a classic age for just incredible emotional turmoil. I remember being 11 probably is one of the most difficult years, and you're just branching out from being a little kid into being able to see what's ahead of you as a teenager. And if you're pretty emotionally attuned to the drama and stuff that's going on, you're realizing that life is kind of tough, and there's not much indication that it gets a lot easier as you get older. And so there's a lot ahead of her in addition to just whatever trauma she's dealing with within her home. And I wasn't real sure what to think about the pixies. I don't know. Initially, I kind of thought my clinical eye of mental health, I'm starting to get concerned.
Okay.
I'm like, we're borderline trouble here. This is, imaginary is good. Imaginary can be helpful. It can be a good coping skill. But how much of this imaginary world is keeping her from getting healthy and dealing with life, and how much of it is starting to pull her away and separate her from other people even more? And she's kind of at a point where she needs to start not leaning on this imaginary world quite so much. But you can tell she's pretty entrenched. And so I was beginning to get a little worried about how far she was into imaginary versus reality.
I mean, where are there healthy lines to draw between a vivid life of imagination, inner life, I guess, and delusion?
Yeah.
Or how do you tell the difference in a kid like that?
In a kid, it's really tough. I mean, I don't like labels. I think they're necessary. We have to have labels. We have to have categories to help define life and know how to treat things. But I really take offense to people who throw labels on kids really early, because everybody's just different and they can all grow at their own pace. However, there is just the reality that sometimes our coping skills, even healthy ones, sometimes can take a turn. And when you, about this age, honestly, when you're still dealing with imaginary friends and things like that at 11 or 12 and 13, if it starts to cause social problems, and the child is not necessarily having motivation to help move toward more socially appropriate coping skills, and they're pretty entrenched in that imaginary world and those delusions or telling lies, things like that, and it's really starting to cause problems with their relationships, and they're not adapting to kind of developing into a more sophisticated level of coping, then it's time to get them some help to figure out how to move into the new level of coping. And I think a degree of imagination and escape is always going to be healthy for us, and we need to know how to do it with limits. But I think she's kind of at a fork in the road.
Well, let's move into chapter 2, and I'll point out, I think just for the sake of getting a discussion started, some of the bigger things that happen in this particular chapter. So chapter 2 is called The Spark. And the first thing that is of significance is, anytime you've read or seen movies that deal in the realm of fantasy, a weapon that has a name is always a weapon of power and meaning. And she is giving a name to the hammer that she had placed in her purse in the first issue. The name she gives it is Kovaleski, which is...
It's amazing.
Yeah, maybe not it doesn't sound like something out of Lord of the Rings exactly. And we'll find out about who Kovaleski is in just a little bit. But before we get there, after naming her hammer through sort of a ritual of sorts that she goes through, she then goes outside and she's laying down these, what I can only assume are like giant traps as part of her imagination about how she's going to stop these giants. And we're introduced to a new character here named Sophia.
Yeah.
Sophia is a sweet kid. She's just moved to the area, and she just, she walks up and, hi, right? She just wants to make friends. What are you doing? What's your name? Can I play too? Sophia ends up becoming a character who she's a loyal friend.
Yeah.
And she's someone who, I don't know how well she understands Barbara, but she understands that Barbara is going to be prickly at times.
Yeah.
But she sticks
with her.
Attaches to her as a friend.
Yeah.
And in a couple of ways really shows her friendship in just a minute here. We take ourselves to school and we learn that Barbara is at least one of the targets of a school bully, a girl named Taylor, who's quite a bit bigger than her. And she has 2 hench girls, I guess.
Yeah, they're pretty mean.
Right, these are some mean kids. And at some point, and we I don't know, part of the spunk of maybe what's to like about Barbara as well is the way she interacts with these bullies. They come up and they start demanding like lunch money basically as a tax, and Taylor puts out her hand and Barbara turns and just spits in her hand.
Yeah.
And says, keep the change or whatever. That's basically all she has. Taylor is going to be a character who comes back again and again. Going back through this book, the number of times they actually get into like physical altercations, Taylor and Barbara, was a surprising number throughout, 7 issues. But we also have our first encounter here in this issue with the school counselor, Mrs. Molly. And I don't guess we ever get her first name. And it doesn't go well. Mrs. Molly had sent somebody, another student, I guess, to, basically call Barbara out of the lunchroom.
It's a huge pet peeve of mine.
Okay, well, and I want to hear about that. I mean, she starts with a real misstep. Calls Barbara out of the lunchroom to Miss Molly's office. And so everybody's going to know that she's going to visit Miss Molly. And when Barbara ends up storming out of this meeting in a minute, she ends up saying to her, hey, next time you want to have a meeting like this, why don't you just write it in skywriting? It'll be more subtle. Yeah.
It's so amazing.
So, yeah, tell me your early on impressions here.
I was not impressed.
Okay.
maybe it's because I have teenagers. School-based counseling is a huge, amazing service that really helps a lot of our kids. Some kids who struggle at school, it's great to have a therapist available as needed to kind of step in and do some work in real time. There's also kids whose parents aren't able to take them to counseling outside of school, and so this is where they get it. It's an amazing service. However, I'm always very mindful to talk to parents and kids to say, is your kid comfortable getting counseling at school? School's not always a safe place for kids, and do we really want to open up trauma in one of their scariest places? And furthermore, this kid's almost going to middle school. She's at an age where she's very cognizant of what people think about her. And so she's already labeled as a weirdo, and then you're going to pull her out and take her to the counselor in front of everybody? I mean, that's just brutal. Mm-hmm. You should know better. I mean, to me, I feel like it's inevitable at some point you're going to have to pull a kid out of class, but there is a more subtle way to do it, and to work with the kid to say, hey, what's the best way for me to schedule these times? Do you want to just come to me every Tuesday at 3? But I feel like, and I do feel like the therapist won me over in that she accepted the feedback and did differently. She adjusted, didn't just do what she'd been doing. She heard her concerns and went about asking for her to come see her in a different way. But I didn't like that. I was like, what in the world?
I didn't think you would, probably. And, middle school, I've said on this podcast before, I had a really wonderful childhood. I'm so thankful for it. The level of stability and support I had at home, I'm the type of kid I would not have done well, without it. I know part of this book is you're stronger than you think. I guess I'm thankful I didn't have to prove how strong I was or could be coming up. But, for anybody, and I'm a kid who enjoyed school all the way up through. Like, I was sad when I graduated from high school. I was like, I don't want to leave these people. Which is not your typical stereotypical reaction to a kid leaving high school. But, middle school is torture.
It is.
It just is. And having any attention called to you, much less it be the school counselor. Well, one more thing happens in this chapter before it rounds out, and that is Barbara Taylor finds her in the school, and Taylor is about to put a pounding on Barbara,
right,
where Sophia does something very brave.
Yeah.
She goes and she gets the principal.
Right.
And brings the principal to intervene, which, maybe Sophia doesn't realize it until after, but she sort of put herself in harm's way by doing that. But at least it gets Barbara out of trouble. But following this, there's a conversation between Barbara and Sophia where we learn about why the hammer was named Kowaleski.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of remarkable that Barbara is already able to let her guard down a little bit around Sophia.
Well, this was a turning point for her to. Sophia did not realize that by going to get the principal, she had stood up to the bully. Maybe it's best that she didn't realize it at the time, because she did. I don't know that she would have done it again, but she really went out on a limb and went and helped her friend, and it was a turning point. It lowered Barbara's guard.
Yeah, and so now Barbara's going to open up to her and tell her about Kowaleski.
Yeah, and the Giants.
And the Giants, tells her about the Giants. So here's our background on Kowaleski. Kowaleski is named for Harry Kowaleski, and this is all explained in the text. Harry Kowaleski was a rookie pitcher in 1908 for the Philadelphia Phillies, who defeated the championship 3 times in 1 week in a tight pennant race. And the name of that team? The Giants. And so this name Kowaleski works on a lot of levels, but it is the weapon to kill giants.
Yeah, and we find out that there's something about whoever connected her to this baseball connection. It's a sensitive subject, because if anybody asks her about baseball or how she knows about Kowaleski, she cuts them off pretty quick. So, in my mind, it must have been her dad. Her dad's been a figure that's we've not seen or heard anything about at this point. We hear a little bit about him later, but it's obviously a sore subject.
Mm-hmm. In fact, at this point, we haven't met either of her parents.
Right.
Following some of this, though, right before the chapter wraps up, Barbara goes back into her house. And once again, she looks up the stairwell and hears her name called out, Barbara! And this is even more chaotic of an image than the first time she looked up the stairwell. Now it looks like wind is tearing through the house. There are these white action lines. And on the bottom of this particular page, it almost the shadows coming toward her almost look like ghostly apparitions.
It looks like demons. It's really scary.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we get now into chapter 3, and this chapter is just called Armor. And in sort of a fun, symbolic way, the chapter opens with Barbara sitting on a park bench or like a bus stop bench by herself, and she's dressed, at least from the waist up, in like a knight in shining armor kind of coat of arms. But her posture is really broken down. And she's talking to one of these imps, or what you had a better word for them earlier.
Pixies?
Yeah, one of these pixies. And she's saying, like, no, I'm not okay. I had a really terrible day. And the rest of this chapter is going to be really explaining what that day was like. And we find ourselves back in another meeting with Ms. Molly.
Yep. So Miss Molly she's done some rapport building, at least. It looks like she did a better job about how she got her into her office. You can see in the image that Barbara's coloring, and her posture is more relaxed. She seems to be much more relaxed and spending time with Miss Molly than she was before, and she's telling her about her new friend, Sophia.
Yeah, and that's really sweet when she's starting to say, like, I think I made a friend.
Right.
There's a little bit of hope in life, at least at this point in the day.
She's also using it, though, as a way to say, listen, I'm normal. You can let me go now.
Oh, true. Okay. So there's a degree of manipulation.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think she's like, hey, you care enough to ask, so here's some information, but now you can also leave me alone.
Tell me, with a kid this age, or I don't know, kid any age, to what extent do you think they are conscious of their own manipulations?
I think it depends on their experience with manipulation and how much they've witnessed it, seen it, learned it. I mean, some kids are just savvier than others naturally, but I definitely feel like, all of us do things we respond in ways sometimes to get our needs met or our wants met. I don't think kids often understand that what they're doing is could be seen as manipulative, but I don't think Barbara's any normal kid. I think she's a lot more. She's got some experiences under her belt that have made her wiser beyond her years when it comes to some of these interactions.
Yeah, she's got some. She's savvy.
She is. She's street smart.
So, despite having what seems like a good meeting with Miss Molly, she then goes on to her PE class, and life turns into chaos once again. This PE teacher wants to look at her purse, which is something that Barbara is always clutching on so tight to, and it's touching one of those third rails in Barbara's life, and Barbara reacts and calls her teacher a really offensive name, and finds herself back in the soup, I guess, as it were. She's back in the principal's office, but somewhere along the way, and she had also sort of pushed Sophia away a little bit. And she gets one of these notes. It's a really sweet note from Sophia that just says, "Are we still friends, Sophia? Love, Sophia." And it's got check boxes, yes or no. You can just see how, even while being sent to the principal's office and in a grumpy and bad mood, Barbara finds this note, and it really makes her day.
It may be the first time I've seen her smile.
Yeah. And it's expressed really well artistically. It almost looks like a music note next to her head, to show how pleased she is. But little does she realize that, chaos is continuing to ensue sort of around her.
I want to step back, though, about the PE teacher.
Yeah.
The last thing the PE teacher said before she got really nasty with her was she asked her about baseball and Kovaleski. It's a real hot-button issue.
That's
you
right.
want to dig into the baseball and the Kovaleski.
Well, and we dig into it immediately after that, because Barbara finds herself back in Ms. Molly's office. And we had seen Ms. Molly was sitting up in the bleachers watching while Barbara was in PE class. And so she'd seen all this transpire, and she says, okay, baseball. And when Barbara comes into the session to sit down, there's a baseball on the table. And, okay, I see you shaking your head. So you tell me this was too much to take head on?
No, I get where she was coming from. I appreciate her efforts. She's trying. And I don't think what she did was wrong. It's one of those things that it was a bold move, but it was the wrong one.
Okay, it's the wrong one, because Barbara ends up slapping Molly and walking out of the room.
She's already on the edge. She's had a rough day, and now somebody's going to keep pushing this button. I do feel like Miss Molly should have seen her response and realized she's not there. She's not ready to talk about this yet.
Yeah. There's something else that happens in this meeting that I think leads to it being really pushed over the edge. And that is, Miss Molly has started to put the pieces together, and surely she's gotten some outside background on what's going on in Barbara's life that we as the readers still don't have. In addition to wanting to talk about baseball, she says, I want to talk about what's going on at home with Karen. Karen's the older sister, and Dave, that's the brother. And then she says something, and it's in the word balloon, but we as readers don't see it because it's been scratched out. Yeah, like redacted, basically. So some of the art in this book, or a lot of the art in this book, sort of mimics the manga style of Japanese illustration. And you see it particularly in this scene here, where Barbara is so upset by this, and you see these lines radiating out from around her body and around her head to show just how intense she is in this moment. And she says, I think we need to talk about, or she's hearing the teacher say, I think we need to talk about, and then it's redacted again. And that's when Barbara stands up and slaps her and storms out of the room. And so, and we kind of wrap up with, or we go back to Barbara sitting on that bus stop bench wearing her suit of armor and saying to the pixie, so yeah, that was my day.
Yeah. Bad day.
Bad day. But before we get out of this chapter, day gets worse because here come Taylor and her friends, and we get into another fist fight. And Barbara is going to get in the fist fight, and she's going to get beat up every single time by Taylor and these girls.
Yeah.
And, I mean, at one point, Barbara's going to bite, she's going to scratch, she's going to do whatever she needs to do to try and get through this fight. But at one point, she gets so caught up in this melee that she just takes sort of a wild swing. She ends up punching Sophia right in the eye. And Sophia had just walked up to try and, see if she could resolve the situation. We have immediate panic from Barbara because, she's saying, look, I was not trying to hit you, and Sophia's just running off.
Yeah.
And, we know that she's scared about this. She made this friend, and now she's losing the friend.
Right.
But on the very last page, she looks up at the sky. And it's there are storm clouds brewing in the sky, and this is really a gorgeous image. She's looking at the sky, and the way the clouds and the shadows are forming really starts to look like a face, an angry face up in the clouds. She says, the signs, you're coming, aren't you? Soon. And, we know this is going to be the face of the giant that she's going to face. So we get now into chapter 4, the ghoul. Early on in this chapter, we move away from Sophia a little bit and sort of take on the point of view of Karen for just a moment. Or we turn our eye on Karen and we see her back at the house. She's just melting down at this point.
Yeah.
She's come in from work. She's frazzled. She puts dinner on the table. Once again, it gets completely rejected by the family. Once again, Barbara is mouthing off to her. And, there's this panel where she just drops her head in her hands, and it's her, I guess, her hair hanging down kind of in her plate, but it also looks like maybe tears are dripping from her face into her plate as well. We get more of this text where the word balloon shows that they are talking about something very specific, but it's still not revealed to us. It's redacted.
Did you have theories when you were reading it about what they're talking about?
I can't recall now, because the first time I read this book was a year and a half ago.
Right.
And so when I came back to the book, I
already
knew.
Yeah, right.
Did you at this point?
Still, in my mind, I really felt like there was abuse going on. Like that was,
yeah.
I felt like there was abuse, was the underlying trauma.
And, as best as I can recall from my first read of this book, I think I thought it was something like that too. It makes sense. What's upstairs? That's where bedrooms are.
It's freaking scary, yeah.
Right, and your mind does go toward the worst, I suppose.
Right.
And I suppose the worst could be a lot of different things.
Right.
But yeah, I thought there was abuse of some kind also, I think. But either way, I also remember feeling a physical fear reading through this, or just apprehension for Barbara.
It's probably some of the counselor in me, but I was really frustrated. I was like, what?
Oh, frustrated not to know.
Yes, I was like, what? what are these words? What are they not saying?
Well, so in this moment of collapse, basically, of freak out now, is that not like appropriate to say that she freaks out? Okay.
I feel like that's perfect.
Okay. Karen is just yelling, she's talking about how am I supposed to know how to do all of this alone? Dad, who knows where Dad is? The two of you just won't grow up and won't help me, and I just can't. And I can't go on and not deal with you going, psycho, she says, Barbara, while upstairs are, and then that's where we've got it all scratched out, right? And this brings things into stark relief for Barbara, too. And, I guess we get that fight or flight response. And usually Barbara's response has been to fight. Except, well, tell me what your thoughts are about this, because she continually goes into this fantasy world, which I suppose is a flight.
It is a flight. And, this is kind of the part of the story that we kind of give a bit of a trigger warning about earlier. It gets pretty dark pretty fast. You could see her starting to lean on her old imaginary world as best she can, but it's not working anymore. The reality has hit her that there's things she can't avoid, and you actually see her kind of slip into a new coping skill that we've not seen yet, and it looks like she's cutting herself in one or two of the panels. It's not super graphic. In fact, I skipped right over it and didn't fully understand. This is kind of one of those pieces in the book that were kind of chaotic, and I was struggling to figure out what all was going on, and I think I just moved right past it really quickly. But you'll see it. It's kind of a step into a new direction with a really unhealthy coping skill.
Yeah, well, she's gone outside, and she's wearing like a helmet on her head, and she's building more of these giant traps. And so she has a knife out because she's like whittling at wood or something like that that's going to be part of this knife trap or this giant trap. And it's in that she sort of turns her attention in a new direction and does this. And this particular behavior is not dealt with again in the book.
Right.
And so I don't quite know what to make of it except to be alarmed.
I feel like it's a step in a new direction. It may not be something she's done before, but it definitely is kind of a move into a more mature distraction that is not a healthy one.
Yeah. So as we move on from there, we get into the next day and we see Barbara trying to repair her relationship with Sophia. She realizes it's kind of the one bright spot in her life. And she even goes in and has another meeting with Ms. Molly. And I think she's reaching out now in a way that we haven't seen her do before.
Yeah.
And this is where Barbara actually opens up to Ms. Molly, kind of like she had done early on with Sophia, tells her all about giants. And I mean, she's got a whole taxonomy of which giants are more threatening and that kind of thing. And the Titan, this will come up later, the Titan is the most dangerous mythical giant of all. And maybe they don't even exist anymore. Maybe they're just legend at this point. But she also explains Kowaleski and the significance of Kowaleski and why she would call her hammer that. And she says, when Kowaleski speaks, the world cries. And so one of the things that stood out to me was that she has invested a lot of faith in the power of this weapon through her engagement with her, fantasy world. But I think we will see in just a minute, in real life, she has come to believe this little hammer that she carries around in her pocketbook to be a true weapon of war.
Right.
So with the relationship at this point between Sophia and Barbara still a little bit on the rocks, Taylor comes in and intervenes a little bit, and you can almost see like the angel and the devil on Sophia's shoulder. And Taylor convinces Sophia to give up some information about Barbara and about her traps that she has out there for giants. And we see this scene where Taylor and the other girl goons are out there just destroying the giant traps on the beach. And even though to us they just look like bags of garbage and sticks hanging out of, sticking up out of the sand, to Barbara this is, a real creation of some kind and a huge betrayal.
Right.
That her friend would tell about this. And this results in another serious fist fight between Barbara and Taylor. And it's one where Barbara goes to a new place. She doesn't end up accomplishing a whole lot of violence herself,
But she's ready to.
She reaches in and she pulls out Kovaleski.
I mean, that would indicate she thinks Taylor is a giant.
And it will also, at least it indicates to me that she's prepared to kill Taylor at this point. And of course, I mean, this is like a ball peen hammer. It's not gonna hurt.
Maybe, yeah.
You know, I mean, it hurt. I'd rather not get hit with one, but it's not gonna take this much bigger girl down. And of course, Taylor ends up really beating up Barbara pretty badly here, to the point where, as we move pages, we're next seeing Barbara waking up in her bed, and we learn that Sophia has basically like drug her home.
Yeah.
But this presents a new terror for Barbara because she's waking up in her bed, in her bedroom, which is upstairs.
Right.
Up till now, every time we've seen her at a safe place in her home, it's been in this like makeshift tent that she has. And it's not clear whether it's in a garage or a storage room of some kind, but it's basically on the first level of the floor of the house.
Right.
And so now she wants to quietly creep out of her bedroom and not be heard and not be seen. And in her mind, terror comes and she looks into a room. And all we see, and we still at this point, I guess, don't exactly know, all we see is a bed that looks like a wooden bed that looks like a torture rack, basically, with...
the person's restrained.
Yeah, a person restrained on it, like ropes around her hands and feet.
There's demons or something.
Yeah, there's in the shadows, there's teeth, and it looks like there's some kind of demon or apparition. Whatever sight she sees in real life, the sight that she sees in her mind's eye is
terrifying,
shocking. Yeah. And she hears her name being called. And, I mean, she even imagines, like, a body crawling toward her. It's really terrifying.
It is scary, yeah.
And then Barbara just slams the door to that room, and that's the end of the chapter.
So have you noticed that the hammer actually is a toy bat?
Is it?
It's like a toy, like a little keychain bat.
Well, let me go back and look at that, because I really did think it was like a ball peen hammer. It's like a little toy bat, and she's driven a nail through it. Okay.
She's made her little hammer out of a baseball bat.
Yeah. I missed that in the image, so yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
I'm so curious about the history of this whole baseball thing.
And we really never get it, do we?
No, we don't. We don't get that answer.
You know, something that brought comfort to Barbara at some point in her life, a happy memory is obviously associated with baseball. And
it fortifies her. Something about that memory brings her strength.
That's right. And, I mean, her knowledge is obviously deep because this appears to be set in the present day.
Yeah.
I mean, with the, 2008 when it was written. And yet, as we look back into it, she's talking about this picture from 1908.
Right.
And I know baseball people. I'm not a baseball person. Are you?
I love baseball, but I don't know much history.
Yeah, but the people that get deep into baseball, like, you just rattle off
history,
stats. And to my nephew Colin out in North Carolina, if you're listening right now, he's a football guy more than anything. But that kid, I mean, he must just study his football cards. He can tell you every stat of every player. Yeah, loves it. And I knew some baseball kids like that when I was young.
Yeah, I just imagine her dad or grandpa or somebody has given her a day that brought her a lot of happiness and joy and strength. Yep. And it's associated with that story and that bat.
So chapter 5 is called The Sacrifice. And in terms of the action that takes place in it, there are fewer major events. But the biggest thing that we have happen is that Barbara starts skipping school. And she has trashed her own like little hideout in that room that she had in the downstairs part of her house, and she's sort of clamming up inside herself. She goes to like this Dungeons and Dragons gaming type shop and just sort of hides out in the back room and is studying her giant books. Once again, the two loyal constants in her life at this point, Sophia and Ms. Molly, who are both, I mean, they go out into the world. They leave the school to go try and track her down and find her.
Sophia goes in her room and finds these receipts that leads her to the store.
Yeah,
and tracks her down.
Some detective work here. That's right. And, she goes and finds her friend. When we get to the close of this chapter, though, we're back down by the shoreline, and we have another altercation between Taylor and Barbara. And in the midst of this, a storm has started to whip up in real life. We can see that the sky is blackening and looking like the clouds are moving in more ominous-looking motions.
I couldn't tell if it was reality or if it was just her emotional state.
Well, isn't that true? Mm-hmm. I mean, there are two views that could be presented here.
Yep. Turns out the storm is both.
Yeah, that's right. What we will learn in a minute is like a nor'easter basically coming in while she is literally standing on the shoreline on the sand. To Barbara's mind, it's a giant who has appeared. And to go to that sort of question of like, who's seeing what, all of the girls have stopped their fighting and they're looking up at the sky. And they all have a look of terror. And as we turn to the very last page of the chapter, we see what we'll obviously know is going to be what Barbara sees, which is this giant, black, ominous figure that's raising up out of the ocean itself. And it's on one of these double-page spreads. So you have the whole width of 2 pages given to just this giant, black, sort of undefined, like rain falling all around it, figure. And we don't really know anything more except we have Barbara say, it's a Titan.
Well, between the altercation and the storm, Miss Molly comes and lays it out and is just like, okay, enough messing around. Enough imaginary world. Your mom's got cancer and she's dying.
You know what? I'm sorry. I guess in my notes I read right past that.
Yeah. And
so we finally know what's going on.
And it's a reality check.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's right. So now we as the reader know, and it's in Barbara's face.
Right.
She can't ignore it anymore. And at the same time of this storm, there's a Titan. And
for the second time, she puts her hands on Miss Molly. Like, she responds in a really physical way that's pretty aggressive. And as a mental health professional, I have some mixed feelings about this. Miss Molly is kind of bound by some ethics where I feel like she's let her boundaries get pretty cloudy with this kid. I understand her reasoning. I understand why she's going to chase her down and let her put her hands on her in order to kind of gain some rapport and trust. But in the real world, had she put her hands on this psychologist twice like this, I think it would have been a different outcome. And so I think I do worry a little bit for a younger reader who reads this to think that would be something that would be an acceptable option, because there's no consequences for it at all. In fact, Miss Molly covers it up.
Yeah, in the book, there's no consequences for it. And it works from a storytelling perspective.
Right.
But so tell me, I mean, after the first time in Ms. Molly's office when Barbara struck her, I mean, what happens? How does this relationship change? How does it, I have to imagine it escalates in a way that the rest of this story doesn't end up playing out.
Right. I mean, in real life, it would go down in a way where, you know, these days we have school security officers and that sort of thing that get involved. Back when I was a kid, you'd just go to the principal's office and call your parents, and you'd probably get a paddling and go home and get in trouble. Now you get charges. You get possibly put in, you know, a behavioral health facility. Like, things escalate super quickly if you get this physical this fast. And it definitely would have not, I really don't think it would have played out in a way where probably the therapist would have continued to just act like it didn't happen, for sure.
Sure. So let me ask this, because we see in different depictions in television and movies where you have a dedicated, and that's what the storyteller is trying to show, how dedicated the therapist or counselor is. And there something takes place like this, where there's a lash out and actually an assault, where the patient ends up hitting the therapist. Can there be a rebuilding of that therapeutic relationship after that?
Absolutely. I think,
so it's not barred.
No, it's not barred. I mean, I think it depends on the therapist. It may depend on the agency and the situation. In the past, where I have worked in facilities, you kind of know going in as a professional that that's something that can happen. You're working with kids who some of them have aggressive behavior, some trauma history, some abuse history, and their responses when they get emotionally charged is to kind of become physical. So you kind of know that's a potential part of the job. My history with that is when a kid would get physical, you know, you would make sure that they were safe, you were safe. There were usually some sort of consequences that would come from that, but it also would become part of your therapeutic work, and just have to kind of respond by setting really clear expectations of how you earn, you know, if they had lost privileges because of their behavior, how they would earn them back. And you would just kind of use that as a part of real life experiences. If you go out in the real world and you respond with your anger in this sort of way, there's going to be consequences, and it's going to take you a while to be able to earn people's trust back. And it's the same way here. In a school setting, because schools are such a vulnerable place now with so many kids the ability for school professionals and to tolerate much aggression is just, the threshold's really small these days, and it's understandable. It is hard then for kids who have emotional issues to navigate that, and it's one more reason I think you have to be really careful about dealing with mental health issues and trying to do therapy at school, because it is a charged, usually a bit of a triggering thing to do therapy at school, and so I think you do set kids up in a way if you're going to deal with it at school and not be prepared to handle their aggression in a safe way.
So you have just talked us through a very serious issue, and in a very serious way. And I chuckled just because as you're trying to do this, you have the distraction of my dog Maggie, who's come alongside and
She's so sweet.
Wants to lick your arm. So,
she's very sweet.
Thank you for continuing through that distraction as well. We mentioned Travell earlier, as he's going to be the guest on our next full episode. I've never seen Maggie respond to a person the way she does to Travell.
Yeah.
Like anybody who comes to the door, family, it doesn't matter. She's going to freak out. It's almost like she can smell it on the air that Mr. Travell has come, and she's like, I'm going to roll over and show my belly. I want to lay on this guy's lap, whatever. All right, well, let's jump back to our story, and we're wrapping up here. We're now in chapter 6 of 7. And there is a literal storm brewing, and there is, in the mind of Barbara, a giant, a literal giant, for her imagination, that is standing in front of her, and it's got a giant club. And her friends are telling her, run. And, of course, they're telling her to run from the storm and get to safety. But in her mind, this is time for battle. The read I get on Barbara is she feels unprepared. For all of the preparation she has done to face a giant, she wasn't expecting a titan. And she says, a titan, God, it's too big. And, she's yelling help, and she's starting to say it's too, she's doubting herself. But then I think she thinks that Sophia is maybe in a little bit of potential trouble here from the giant. And so at this point, she is going to go for it.
Yeah.
And what's really neat in the depiction is that Barbara now opens her pocketbook where the name Kovaleski is sealed across the zipper area. And it's almost like light is coming out as she's pulling out her hammer. And we'll see a double-page spread coming up here in a couple of pages where what we know in real life to be a little hammer looks like a hammer of the gods, that she is holding it like the length of a full staff, and the hammerhead is equal to the size of her whole body. And it's a giant killer at this point. But she's not yelling about, giant, I'm going to kill you. At this point, this is like we're having a total blending of the fantasy and the reality. Because what she is yelling into the wind is, you will not take her. Do you hear me? You will not take my mother. And we realize this whole battle that she's been preparing for to fight giants is she's going to save her mother's life, she thinks, by killing a giant.
Right.
She is tossed about by the storm here. She's tossed about by the giant as far as she's concerned. And she's yelling, go away, you can't have her. And she's just going to fight, and she brings out her giant hammer. And, she's just yelling and battling, and this goes on for pages and pages. And, she comes back to this refrain, you're not going to take my mother. And then eventually, she's starting to yell, I beat you. I won. I guess the storm in real life must be calming down a little bit. But the giant speaks back to her at this point. And the giant almost seems sympathetic.
He seems caring.
Very much so. And he says, little warrior, I did not come for her. I came for you. And she's crying now. And she says back, but I beat you. And he says, I know, child. I know. And he's apologizing to her, the giant is. He's saying, I'm sorry. But we still don't exactly know by the end of this chapter what our resolution is.
What's he sorry for?
Right. What's he sorry about? What does it mean that he came for her and not for the mother? And then it's a full-on assault by Barbara where she, just dives back into the storm. It looks like she has taken Kovaleski and run the giant basically through the mouth from the top to the bottom. And she disappears into the waves. And as our chapter closes, we see Sophia running out into the ocean, which is literal peril for her, yelling for Barbara because she wants to try and save her from the storm. The chapter ends and we don't know what has happened. And then ominously, chapter 7 is just titled The End.
Yeah.
What do you think about this, the way this fight transpired and how she starts to call out the real life situation?
I was so confused. I kept going back and forth, and some of the images I couldn't tell what I was looking at. And so I went back over it 2 or 3 times and finally I had to tell myself, just move on. Move on. Let the story come together and it'll come together. And I was sad because I could tell it definitely didn't play out the way she wanted to, no matter how hard she fought. But then the giant's compassion toward her was really puzzling.
Yeah, puzzling to me too.
Yeah.
And I think probably for any reader, and as we, when you think about this coming out in monthly format, I say something like this in almost every episode of our podcast. But, back in 2008, you had to wait a month to find out
Right.
what happened.
Right.
Okay, so chapter 7 opens up, and we see Sophia standing on the shoreline, and she's holding Barbara's pocketbook. And she's just kind of clutching onto it, hugging the pocketbook. And so we have the sense that whatever's going on is not so good. And we're back to the house, and we see, it looks like Ms. Molly is there at the house, and she's trying to do some cleanup, and we see Karen in the kitchen making coffee, and she looks stunned, and there are police cars outside. And we get basically a news report talking about how giant this particular storm was. Then there are police and all kinds of different adults. I imagine there's some kind of social worker or somebody like that if they'd have been called in. I don't know.
They actually call it a tornado. Like they
tornado.
call it a nor'easter, and then down they say there haven't been any truly significant tornadoes on Long Island for decades. Do y'all have tornadoes up there?
We had a terrible hurricane when I
Yeah.
was about 6 years old, Hurricane Gloria. But no, I have no knowledge of tornadoes happening in that part of the country. But either way, yeah,
It's a bad storm.
It was bad, whatever it was. But part of what we learned from the radio voice as well is that there is one school-aged girl missing at this point, and we see all the people who. I mean, it almost looks like a funeral, like a wake at the house, where people are just trying to comfort each other and figure out what's going on. And just when it seems like they're about to give up hope, a sopping wet, bunny ears all busted up Barbara comes, like, dragging herself back into the house. And Sophia had showed up at the house with bagels, and Barbara says, "Do I smell bagels?"
And she looks happy for the
I'm
first
starving.
one of the few times in the book.
That's right. She looks happy. And of course they all dive on her and start hugging her, and it's this wonderful moment. And you see a really sweet moment between Barbara and Sophia where they're hugging. Barbara says, "You didn't leave me. Thank you." And Sophia says, "Is it over?" And Barbara says, "No." And she asks her if she can stay for a little bit.
Can you tell me what you think? What is going on in this panel? I know that you guys can't see it, but I'm looking at a panel that looks like the Kovaleski hammer, which is a little baseball bat keychain, and it looks like it's laying on. Is it broken glass?
Yeah, it does. It looks like there's shattered glass on the floor, and this is right after Barbara has come in. And I always think of this as like when you see in a movie when somebody comes back in and people literally drop everything that they're holding, and let the consequences be what they may for that. It's one of those things in a movie too, like leaving the water running or the refrigerator door open and leaving the room, and I just like it derails me completely.
Right.
I think it's something like that. But I don't know what the glass is supposed to mean there. But either way, Sophia agrees that she's going to stay. And then Barbara looks up the stairs. And for the first time, the stairs aren't completely covered in shadow.
Well, and she asked her, "Is it over?" I'm guessing she means, "Is my mom? Did my mom die?" That's what I wondered.
So I thought it was Sophia asking, "Is it over?"
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Who knows how insightful Sophia's being at this point? Like, is
Is your internal battle over?
Yeah, is your battle against the giants. Because maybe Sophia has bought in some element to this fantasy.
Okay.
And she says, no, it's not.
That's what's happening.
And so she looks up the stairs, and meanwhile, we're seeing a panel of the giant, like, sinking to the bottom of the sea, and we're seeing the word balloons depicted in the way that we saw before when the giant spoke. They're heavier shading around the circle of the word balloons. We know that's who's talking. And it's sort of like something that Barbara's envisioning in her mind's eye here. And it goes back to, I did not come for her. I came for you, child. And then this is some of what I'd put down in my notes, too, of what the giant says here. He says, all things that live die. This is why you must find joy in the living, while the time is yours, and not fear the end. To deny this is to deny life. To fear this is to fear life. But to embrace this, can you embrace this? And then it shows an image of Barbara popping her head up from above the water, kind of flashback. And he just says, you are stronger than you think.
So to me, when he's saying, can you embrace this? Can you keep going? Are you going to live? Are you going to keep on trucking? And she comes out of the water ready to keep going, ready to continue the fight, but in a different way, it looks like.
And I don't know whether it's just the air conditioning, but I'm getting chills a little bit here. And I think it's from sort of the power of that. You are stronger than you think.
Yeah.
And here she goes. She says, okay. She takes a deep breath. She leaves her friends behind her. She walks up the stairs, and she just says, Mom. And she peers around, and for the first time, we see, as she is in reality, her mother laying in this bed it's like a hospital bed has been put into her bedroom, and she's got an IV drip in a one of those machines that you would see in a hospital that keep up with your vitals next to her, and she's just laying there. And of course, at this point, it seemed from the conversation downstairs like no one has told her yet that Barbara is missing.
Right.
And the mother, for all of her illness, looks kind of beautiful and peaceful in a way here.
You can tell she's frail.
Yeah, you can tell she's frail, but there is something peaceful about this image. And then
you can tell she's happy to have Barbara there.
Well, and who knows how long it's been since Barbara would approach her.
Right.
And so Barbara gets closer. She comes up to the rail of the bed. And oh my goodness, this is just a beautiful splash page, one single page, where the only image on it is Barbara crawling into the bed, lifting up her mother's arm, and putting her head on her mother's chest and her mother's arm around her. And
I cried.
The first time I read this book, I cried too. And you know what? The second time I read this book,
I might cry now.
I teared up a little. Yeah. What a moment.
Well, and I had a lot of thoughts. I mean, you think about a lot of things when you think about someone having a terminal illness and the fear of people just losing them. But then this struggle kids go through of how scary it is to see somebody you love look different and to look sick and to look scary to them because they don't look the same. And to see her be able to let go of that and be able to kind of accept where mom is and them both be content.
Yeah.
It's really healing. And
then they just lay there together. And, you can see the mom has a smile on her face.
And she's apologizing to her mom. She says, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom.
Yeah. It is. Like, it's going to nearly get me here as we sit here and talk about it.
It's really sweet. It seems like a really healing scene.
So the rest of the book ends up being basically an epilogue where it's the new school year that it's begun. The kids are being welcomed back. So she's going to be in 6th grade now. And, she's asking about, like, who did something interesting? The teacher's asking, who did something interesting this summer? And we're going to have Barbara called upon to tell about how she killed a giant this summer. And everybody's, it's just, she's happy.
She's not reading about giants. She's still reading, but she's reading like a book that says queen bees and wannabes. She's kind of being a little middle school girl, that's maybe trying something new, not as focused on the darkness and the fights, but just, kind of nonsensical middle school stuff.
Yeah. And then we zoom forward a few pages and, you feel good for a moment because Barbara is having more of like a healthy, normal start to a school year. And now we see Barbara and Ms. Molly sharing a hug in the hallway. And Barbara is asking, "Is it time?" And Miss Molly says, "Yes, the doctor said soon Karen's going to come home or come over here and get you." And Barbara asks Miss Molly if she'll go with her as well. But you see as they're holding hands and they're kind of walking away, Ms. Molly is listening to Barbara, who has a new perspective. And she says, she's saying that there's nothing to be afraid of. We're just going to say goodbye. And then the next images we have are of a cemetery, of a casket there at the cemetery. And at the funeral, Barbara takes her pocketbook with Kovaleski off of her, off from around her head and shoulders, and lays it on top of the casket.
It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. We get just a little bit of additional information about how, because Karen is now an adult, because she's now 18, she can be in charge of the two younger kids and they can stay in their home, and that's going to be okay. And there's a sweet scene with Molly and Barbara afterward where they're back at the house again. Barbara is saying to Miss Molly, like, I'm going to be okay. I'm really sad, but we knew that it was going to come. And she hugs Miss Molly again and says, thank you. You did a lot for me. You did a lot for my mom too. Or my mom thanks you as well. And to wrap up that scene, we have I love it when an artist will do this. It's just a white background. You don't see any of the furniture that's in the room or anything else. You just see the figure of Barbara, and she's smiling and she says, "We're a lot stronger than we think we are."
That's definitely the message of the book.
Yeah. And then a couple of pages from the end, we have Barbara looking out the window and just seeing the figure of the giant, of the Titan, standing in ankle-deep water out in the ocean, with the moon behind him. It's almost as if she's saying goodbye to the Titan as well.
Seems like to me he's watching over her too.
Yeah. Very different direction for that giant character to take than what we expected all along.
Yep.
But a really beautiful story.
It is. It is a beautiful story. I've got a friend who's a therapist who worked as a social worker on the oncology unit in Children's Hospital for over 10 years, and then she went into private practice doing therapy with families who were facing chronic illnesses or terminal illnesses or grief. And I tried not to text her in the middle of the night after I finished reading it. I waited till the next day, but sent her the link and said, "I want you to put this in your tool belt. I think this is a really great book for some of your kids to read, to just be able to have some perspective and to be able to give them some ways to think about their struggles and strength and battles." I think it's a beautiful story that it doesn't sugarcoat it. It definitely shows the struggles. It definitely, mom passed. It happened, but in the end, she's stronger. She's grown. She made it through. She's a healthier kid overall, and she's got a great support system around her now. So
Yeah.
It is a happy story in the end.
Wow. That's awesome. Crystal, thank you. Thank you for bringing your expertise to this, and your life experience.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was great. I would have never found this book otherwise, and I'm so glad I got to experience it. I don't have to go watch the movie now.
It is worth your time to
Yeah.
watch. It's a good movie. Well, this has just been terrific. So thank you once again to you, and thank you to all of you out there listening. Let us know what you think. Give us your feedback on Instagram at Graphic Novel Apostle or via Gmail, graphicnovelapostle@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you guys. See you next time.
Thanks, Mark.